Console open. Engage Sanctioned files. Welcome to the Fluffenhammer.
Hello, my little fluffers, and welcome once more to the Patreon exclusive shows. This is the beginning of a new season of shows. This is the Fluffenhammer Sanctioned. This is where we cast an eye over the little bits of lore and fluff that you may not quite realise exists. But of course, we'll come to that in a moment. For I'm Gruffy, I'm Adam, I am your host, and I will take you by the hand and lead you through the various myriad passageways of this crystalline labyrinth. And with me, of course, always, is George.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Very excited about today's Patreon show. It's my jam. This one really is. It's my jam.
Your sentient, oozing, gooping, tentacled jam.
Exactly, yes. It's jam that's actually made from some sort of effluent of some extra-dimensional slug-like creature with lots of tentacles and things. Lovely.
Space slug jam.
I mean, it's just so. It's so pertinent at the moment as well because I've been sort of in a sort of Lovecraftian mood for a while now. I've been watching documentaries about the man himself, and I've also been playing Bloodborne, which is very, 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 very Lovecraftian. I made the mistake the other day of picking up my Necronomicon, the big leather-bound volume of H.P. Lovecraft stories from my shelf, and leafing through them. And, of course, now I've got to read it.
Of course.
I've got to read the whole thing, which is basically his whole canon.
Yeah.
Everything that he was ever out there, and stuff that wasn't out there, of course, because a lot of the stuff you'll find was never published.
No, that's very true. Actually, we're going to come to the publishing and everything shortly. But before we do that, George, I need you to join me in a chant.
Okay. Oh, is it? Are we going to do the I Shubnik?
No. This one it's a bit easier. It's for
time.
I actually got it out of this book here, My First Cthulhian Summoning.
Okie dokie.
Let's try this. Hakuna Matata. Such a wonderful phrase.
I think Adam. I think you may have the wrong book.
Oh, all right. Oh, sorry. 1 second.
Maybe there was some egregious printer's error.
No. Sorry, it's entirely my fault. I'll try that again. Cthulhu Fatagan. Such a wonderful phrase. Cthulhu Fatagan. No passing phase. It means no worries until the end of your days. Cthulhu Fatagan. It's Paul Logan Blaze.
Brilliant.
Hello.
Having a slightly Relayan moment there.
Yeah. Just crawling from the pits there, just pulling myself out of the slime. Actually, into more slime. That's how
it's going. Well, I'm sure if there's, depending on how this show goes, there's going to be plenty of that.
Oh, plenty of fluids everywhere.
Absolutely.
From the slime he came, the slime he whence goes.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, you know what? As much as I'm really happy with that introduction for you, Paul, there's something missing.
Yep.
Isn't there?
Tentacles. Tentacles.
I think it's the word. It's Sugar Bear!
Indeed. So many names. Like the gods themselves, I have so many names.
You know what I like about this lineup? I think every single one of us has done a Lovecraftian podcast at some point together.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Three of us have...
All three of us, yeah. We've got sort of pedigree in this regard, which I kind of like.
We are the unholy trinity.
Yeah, definitely.
Well,
definitely.
I've had George, you were on Lurkers in the Lobby twice, maybe 3 times.
I was. We watched terrible, terrible adaptations of Lovecraftian stuff. I mean, really god-awful stuff.
Paul, you did 1 Lurkers in the Lobby, I think, but we also did the...
Witch Hunt, I think.
But we also did the IDW Infestation crossover for the Underbase.
Yes, we did.
Oh, which also had a Lovecraftian
It
bent,
did.
yeah?
It did.
Oh, interesting. Transformers and Lovecraft. Now there's a crossover.
So what actually happened here is that I've combined George's more academical look at horror and Paul's slimy, gooey look at horror.
Yep.
Slimy, gooey.
Yeah.
I like that.
I've put you in a room, and either we're going to talk about it, or we're going to let them fight. There's
no fighting. There's no fighting.
No, I didn't come prepared for that. I have no wards or no summons ready or anything like that. If I'd have known about that, I'd have carved symbols into my flesh. And,
I'm a lover, not a fighter.
Summoned something. Yeah, I'd have summoned something to fight in my face. Just how I play RPGs, that's how I roll. You go do it.
This is your problem, not mine.
Absolutely.
You've got more sanity points than I have. Away with you. Away with you.
Yeah, the fun thing is, though, if you're doing a Lovecraft RPG, then you don't really want the sanity points, because the fun starts to happen when you start to lose them. It's when you start to roll on the random tables and you develop a phobia and a philia, which are either contradictory or complementary. That's kind of fun.
I always remember one of them. It was a sort of medieval-based fantasy world that was a Lovecraftian RPG, and one of the characters, he lost so many sanity points. He thought he was being haunted by the ghost of his dead father.
Okay.
Then he was actually haunted by the ghost of his dead father.
Okay.
Oh, he was actually haunted by the...
And then a trickster spirit decided to take the form of his dead father to haunt him.
Brilliant.
Did you just do
He was
Hamlet?
being haunted by... Pretty much, he was being haunted by how he thought his dad would respond, how his dad actually responded, and how an outside influence thought his dad would respond.
Absolute brilliant. So you've got like 3 levels of insanity going on there, all at once.
And it ended up he had to start shifting some of the insanity points over to his horse, because otherwise...
So this horse started to develop problems.
The horse ended up thinking it was a moose. So.
Brilliant. Absolute brilliance. I love it.
It was
absolutely love it.
It was a strange game. It was good fun.
I can imagine. I like the fact that you have the situation where you can proxy insanity to something else. I'm going to send my broom insane.
That's just Fantasia.
I was going to say, dun dun dun.
Yeah, of course. Of course, this is the fun of Lovecraft, though, isn't it? I mean, what I like about the RPG systems in particular is I like to sort of accrue insanity points. I like to be the kind of character that wants them, that kind of secretly embraces the mythos,
So you play Call of Cthulhu and want to lose.
Want to lose, essentially. Well, that's the fun of it, isn't it? I mean, to be fair, if you play like most of the Call of Cthulhu RPG systems, you're going to lose anyway.
That's true.
Isn't it? They're not really the RPGs where you win out in the end.
It's a mild digression, but
yes.
Has anyone ever played Dread? Right? Dread.
No.
It's an RPG, and it works perfectly with Call of Cthulhu. We're actually currently I'm working on trying to integrate it into Space Hulk for a future Patreon actual play.
Oh, so much fun.
And what it is there's no dice rolls, right?
Okay, that's interesting.
There's a Jenga tower.
What?
I love it.
If you do an action, you've got to take a block away from the Jenga tower.
Oh, God.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a novel system for RPGs. I don't think Gary Gygax ever considered that.
No, not at all. But
somehow,
is this an official thing or just one?
No. Dread is an official game, but much like Dungeon Crawl X, which is the one that I'm currently using to plug into other games, it's really good for plugging in. It's built to do one-shot horror games.
I was going to say, I imagine that it would be rather short, wouldn't it? Because, if the tower falls, then presumably it's over.
Yeah, well, it's a failure, and the tower has to be rebuilt for other people. So basically, you are trying to take stuff out so it doesn't fall, but you're hoping that it collapses for other people, because if it collapses for somebody else, it gives you that little bit of space.
Yeah.
So it's a really fun game. It's really cool.
That does sound really interesting, actually. I wouldn't mind giving that a go.
I'll bring it to my giant box of tricks in August.
Oh, brilliant. So maybe we can get something. Yeah.
I've got a couple of plans for August.
Brilliant. So that sounds good.
Augustus left.
That was a brilliant segue.
I am the king.
That was a fabulous segue, I've got to say, because of course, Augustus Derleth, Lovecraft borrowed a lot of his stuff from Augustus.
Yeah. Right. So let's get on to this. Let's set this out. Yes.
Let's get on the topic.
In case you haven't got it yet, ladies and gents.
So the topic.
In case you haven't got it.
The topic is H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos and his work and how it integrates into the Warhammer and 40k universes. And the Age of Sigmar. Now, what we'll do is we're going to start off a little bit with who was Howard Philip Lovecraft.
Oh wow!
Yeah. Can anyone else just see this word just flashing on and off, and we're just trying to cover it up, just going, yes, we're aware. We are aware that this is an elephant in the room, and we will have to deal with it. But
this is the thing whenever you discuss Lovecraft in any frame, particularly in sort of the ideologically charged state that we're currently in culturally, you kind of need to discuss the guy.
Yes, you do.
You've got to discuss the man and then discuss the fiction and the mythos almost separately from him.
I think it's actually unfair to discuss his work without discussing him, because he is integrated into his work in a way that I would be hard-pressed to think of other authors.
Well, it's a really good example of how something good can come of something quite negative, I suppose. Yeah. For those, if you're listening to this, I'm sure you must know. I mean, H.P. Lovecraft was a very damaged man.
Yeah.
He was a very damaged man. Both his mother and his father died in an insane asylum. He was quite heavily abused by his mother and by his aunts. He developed some very particular neuroses as a result. He was he couldn't integrate with people. He couldn't function around people, and had some very archaic and frightened views of the world, which informed certain anxieties within his fiction. But it's a very good example of the fiction being wiser than the man, than the creator, and of something wholly negative creating something positive.
Yeah. I think, right, okay, before we get into the man himself, shall we get to the elephant in the room? Or should...
Yeah.
I don't...
The very white, purebred white elephant.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be white.
There is a certain train of thought that could come out and say quite easily that Howard Philip was a giant old-fashioned racist.
He was a giant old-fashioned racist.
Well, yes, he was, but I think that's a very one-dimensional view. Lovecraft was a man who was terrified of everything.
That's absolutely true. He was actually generally afraid of humanity, wasn't he? I mean, if he were alive today, the characteristics he exhibited, he would be diagnosed with all sorts.
Oh God, yeah.
He was almost certainly. I think he was on the spectrum. Yeah. I think that's definitely true. I mean, I'm absolutely certain he was. I mean, I for those of you who don't know, I work, and so does Adam, in social care and whatnot. And the traits he exhibits are very autistic. They're heavily autistic. He is somewhere on the spectrum. He also had almost certainly either bipolar or clinical depression.
Yeah. I would actually go as far as saying that he probably hits a lot of the traits for EUPD, for emotionally unstable borderline personality disorder.
I think you're probably right there.
The man, he lived a very sheltered life, and by that I don't mean he was sheltered by other people. He positioned himself to be as far removed from humanity as physically possible. Well,
there was a period of his life, wasn't there, when he didn't go outside?
Yes.
Like at all. Yeah. There were a period of years, when both as a child and as an adult. As a child, he was kept away from the world and locked up in an attic, by all accounts, because his mother gave some very odd reasons for it, indeed. One of them was that he was too sickly and frail, which was could probably actually be true because he was sickly and frail. But the other one she used to tell people was that he was ugly.
Yes.
He's too ugly to go out. And she used to tell him that too. And the weird thing is, you look at the photographs of Lovecraft, he's not an ugly man at all.
No, he's a haunted man, and he does have a slightly brick-like face.
But he's not ugly.
No, I wouldn't say that.
He's the kind of face you would not, I'd say he's nondescript. It's the kind of face you wouldn't even notice.
Yeah.
If he walked past you in the street.
Right.
There's nothing distinct or you certainly wouldn't recoil in horror from him, but Lovecraft grew up through a period of his life thinking that this was true, that people would recoil from him.
Which feeds into all of his work.
Yeah. I mean, you look at some of there's not many photos of him that exist, but the ones that do, you can kind of see that the idea for things like the deep ones probably came from him staring at himself in a mirror. And it's not because that's how he looks, it'll be how he sees himself.
It's how he imagines. I mean, the man's imagination was insane. During these periods of seclusion and the readings that he undertook, because his grandfather, by all accounts, had a vast library that he sort of secluded himself in as a kid, he developed this incredible imagination. And I mean, like, unlike anything really that was occurring at the time. It's a totally unique imagination that probably wouldn't have come about in the shape that it did and to the same intensity were it not for these neuroses and were it not for these anxieties and problems that he had.
A good old Whipple. I freaking love Lovecraft's. I'm trying to remember his last.
Yes, the industrialist.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember his last name. It's Whipple something, isn't it? It's Whipple Van Buren Phillips. That's his name.
Yeah, it's something like that, isn't it? Yeah, it's
that is an amazing name.
And he looks like that as well. Have you seen the photographs of him? Yeah. He looks like that name. He's got the big mustache, and he's often in a top hat and whatnot. It's sort of like, you look like that name.
What you were saying there about Lovecraft forcing himself out of the way, being in these states of seclusion. The most important one for that, and I know we're kind of jumping around a little bit, and we're going to get into something a bit in a minute.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that we kind of deal with the elephant in the room before we get into
Absolutely.
anything else.
I mean, actually, it's important to establish because certainly in the 40k universe, there's a direct influence. There's at least a reflection of it.
Yeah.
So it all feeds in. Yes. It all feeds together.
It does, and as fiction always does, it shows a mirror to society as a whole. And Lovecraft's work, a lot of the time, when you kind of dig through the more celestial and the more out there parts of the mythos and the horror,
boy, does it go out there.
Oh, it does. There is always that sense of isolation. We are alone. We are unimportant. The creatures he talks about, they're not evil. They don't come for you. Yeah, what are you? You're an ant.
Exactly. It's ridiculous to think of them as evil, isn't it? I mean, the larger entities, the cosmic entities that occur in Lovecraft, which are analogous to gods, they're so vast in scope and they operate on levels of being that are so far beyond what humanity can conceive of. They appear divine or infernal. They appear almost like godlike and abstract. They're not. They're extra-dimensional entities. But the notion of them being evil is as absurd as, say, a virus or a microbe in our own bodies thinking of us as evil. It's that absurd. It's that ridiculous. It's almost like whatever negative impact they have upon humanity, and it is fairly profoundly negative, is as a result of their natural being, of their processes, rather than as a result of any intention. Although some of them do definitely have intention.
Yeah, this stuff like the Mygo, the stuff that's much lower down in the mythos.
Yes.
The ones that are closest to being human, as it were, or closest to showing human characteristics. It's odd that the ones that are closest to being near to us have the closest to being semi-evil.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely it. Because their intention is much more mundane, isn't it? It's usually power or influence or money in some instances that's motivating them. Whereas things like Cthulhu, for example, or even vaster Azathoth. Azathoth has no intention at all. That's the interesting thing about Azathoth. It is the blind idiot god and the creator of all. But it has no direct intention.
No. No.
It creates realities arbitrarily as a result of its being, because of the mad, feverish visions that flash through its multiple faceted minds. It's Zeech.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
It's essential. I mean, this is one of the clear overlaps. There are overt overlaps and influences, but Zeech is Azathoth.
See, again we're going a bit over. See, I was actually thinking, Azathoth, to me, a little bit, is the Emperor. This thing at the centre of the universe, not that sentient, but is a core of the universe.
I don't know, because I've always regarded the Emperor as like Sigmar, as sort of analogous to Sigmar in AOS, in the sense that he is the divine in humanity, or a type of divinity that has intent, that has very human intent, and that places humanity at the forefront of that. Whereas the Chaos powers are... They're related to humanity, obviously. They have their origins are with humanity and the sentient races of the universe, but they're far more abstract than the Emperor ever was.
I can see where Paul's coming from, though. If you think about the Emperor as the multifaceted, splintered personality that is spread across the galaxy.
Oh, absolutely.
The body being the anchor, the centre of the bubbling chaos, or the bubbling mass.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because what is at the core of the Emperor, which is something that'll never be answered. It'll never be answered. Quite what he is.
Pink fluffy
is fascinating.
Dancing on rainbows. Pink fluffy unicorns dancing on rainbows. That's what's at the centre.
I mean, wouldn't it be a great irony if at the centre of the Emperor is something more chaotic than chaos?
Yes.
Wouldn't that be great? What if he took the very essence of chaos and made it into his own particular divinity, the source of his own divinity? Because we do know from the HH books that he did bargain with the Chaos powers. That's no longer a rumour. That's absolutely true. He did steal a lot of their power, which is why they don't like him.
Yep.
That's actually absolutely canon now. It used to be a rumour. It is absolutely canon now. If you read
First Heretic.
The first Heretic, yeah. You see it. You actually see it. It's sort of like, that's answered.
There it is.
That's definite,
right there.
But it's an interesting point that Paul brings up, because there is an essential mystery at the core of the Emperor. And mystery is at the core of Lovecraft's metaphysics itself. I mean, the whole point of Lovecraftian metaphysics is that it is unknowable. Yeah. You could get answers to it, but they would make no sense to you. They would drive you mad. They would boil your brain in its pan, because they're so beyond what humanity could preconceive. The funny thing about the metaphysics Lovecraft created is that it's so elaborate, it's so vast that it actually crosses it's something that occurs both within natural law and then transcends it and creates its own law. So it's the point at which physical reality and abstract metaphor and spirituality and metaphysics overlap and bleed into one another. And of course, the entire metaphysics of both AOS and the 40k universe operate on that dynamic. That's the entire basis of everything that's sort of fantastical or spiritual or demonic or divine in those universes. So you can definitely see how the core of those universes was derived from the dynamics that Lovecraft created. The funny thing about Lovecraft, of course, is you actually can't talk about any kind of popular or genre fiction now without talking about him.
Well,
because his influence was so vast, it touches everything.
He even gets into True Detective.
Yeah, absolutely he does.
Did
absolutely.
he?
Yellow King. The Yellow King. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the Yellow King is in True Detective.
I need to see True Detective.
Yeah.
Good grief. All right.
Absolutely.
You look at the people that you classify as the masters of horror. John Carpenter, a massive Lovecraft fan who's...
Oh, boy, can you tell. I mean, the thing is like, it is a Lovecraftian entity. It is the very essence of a Lovecraftian entity. It's got everything that you want from a Lovecraftian entity.
Yeah.
But it's important to unpack that term, though, isn't it? I mean, Lovecraftian. I mean, the guy has become an adjective. He's become a describing word. His name, and isn't it a wonderful one? It's so cool. The fact that his name was Lovecraft, and that's become the adjective. It's the kind of poetry that makes me think there is some sort of influence acting upon the universe to make it so, you know?
Do you know the name of his first editor?
Oh, go on. What is it?
John Dearheart.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Lovecraft and Dearheart. That's ridiculous.
That's a Victorian crime-solving crew if I've ever heard.
It is. If you wrote that, if you put that in a story, the editor would come back to you and say, that's a little ridiculous.
Yeah, little on the nose.
It is.
But I mean, what's really interesting, and this is actually going into somebody that I would also like to talk about in relation, one of the many authors that I would like to talk about in relation to the sort of Warhammer universes. He had a pen pal. Does anyone know who his pen pal was that he spoke to at least, well, he sent letters to at least twice a week?
A certain creator of Conan, wasn't it not?
It was Robert E. Howard.
Yes.
Now, I don't know how much you know about Robert E. Howard and the life.
He was an odd bloke.
Yes, he was.
I know that much.
There's quite a lot about Robert E. Howard, which has been kind of looked at with more modern eyes, and a lot of things jump out. There's an interesting little correlation between the two, because I'm going to talk about the people themselves for a little bit. Howard Philip Lovecraft was married for a short time.
I know, which is the weirdest thing ever.
She was a touch-me-not wife.
Yeah, and also Jewish.
Yes.
Which is the most bizarre thing. I remember when I first learned that, when I was looking into the guy's life, and I was like, what? The guy, to provide context to this, as well as being fairly racist and whatnot, Lovecraft was fairly anti-Semitic. If a Jewish person turns up in his stories, there's a tendency for them to start sprouting tentacles and growing hooves and horns and whatnot at some point. That tends to happen.
It's true. It is true.
So for him to marry a Jewish woman, or actually for him to know any women, barring his relatives, and to marry at all, is just bizarre.
Well, there is a story of a lady called Susie, who was a couple of years older than him, and apparently he used to go walking with her.
Right.
Not far, obviously, because, going outside, trees!
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there are lots of odd stories about, like, first-hand stories from his neighbours and whatnot, about seeing him walking out, because he used to walk quite a lot, despite being like a shut-in. But he was a very odd man, even in that respect, and he would like shuffle along and his head would be bowed and he'd be muttering to himself, and he'd often be in the rain. He had a thing about rain. And he would try not to make eye contact. He would hate the notion of talking to people.
He would.
Or of engaging socially out in the world. Such an odd guy. And the more I read about him, the more I feel sorry for him.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
why
he was so damaged. He was so hurt, you know.
This is why I wanted to discuss that earlier, because I think it's very important to realise that he was not racist for the sake of dislike of black people or Jewish people or anything like that. He was racist in its purest form, to use a horrible term. He hated and was terrified of everybody.
He was more a misanthrope, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Really, he was a very genuine misanthrope. He actually disliked humanity, full stop. I mean, he had real issues with humanity itself. And in his isolation, that seemed to have, like, his fear of humanity mingled with these very old world ideas, with this romanticized perspective he had about Englishness, for example.
Yes.
He was very much an Anglophile. He had this very bizarre notion of like Victorian England, despite the fact that he was well beyond that himself.
Yeah.
And of class structure, and of manners, and of being a gentleman, and all of this stuff, which came largely, it seems to me, from fiction.
Yes, from Bram Stoker's Dracula, from Edgar Allan Poe's work. Yeah.
Yeah. Rather than from any like historical reality. Yeah. I think it came from fiction.
Well, look at his choice of words that he uses throughout the stories. They are anarchic at the time. They're archaisms, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, Eldritch is one of his absolute favourites.
Yeah.
Nobody knows what Eldritch means. Squamous, Batrachian, gibbous, he uses these very big, very archaic words that have a certain flowery poetry poetry to them and are sort of like resonant in and of themselves, and then overuses them massively.
Well, yeah, he's just basically going into Byron's poetry shop with a fishing net and just taking everything he could. But what I was aiming towards here, that Lovecraft was indeed married for a while, and he lived in New York for a short time, which is something I can't get my head around. But during that time, he lived in New York. At that time,
the most multicultural city in the world, probably, at that time.
There's a there's a story that he went outside on like the second day, saw a couple of Black Navy guys, or like ship workers, ship hands, that's the word I'm after, screamed and ran back into the house.
I can well believe that.
Mm-hmm. And then
I have visions of it's that Simpsons thing where old man Simpson comes into the bordello, sees his Bart, then just turns back right round.
Yeah.
Whilst over in Texas, you've got Robert E. Howard, who at this time, he's working outside, he's doing all this stuff, and he meets a lady, and they become close. But once again, she becomes a touch-me-not relationship. They don't lay a hand on each other. There's all the stories that she was like trying to induce some kind of physical romanticism between them, and he was very much not interested. And I think that is probably something that these two discussed quite a lot. Yeah. The difference being, Lovecraft was a terrified individual who probably wouldn't know what to do with a naked human being in front of him.
No.
Whilst there is a large amount of theory that Robert E. Howard was quite possibly gay.
I have an inkling that Howard was probably gay. Lovecraft, I imagine, was probably asexual, to be honest.
Yeah, he had no interest in anything to do with the sloppy parts of a human.
Well, this comes through in his writing, doesn't it? It really does come through in his writing. It is one of the most sexless bodies of work you'll ever read. There is no romance in Lovecraft. The only time any kind of union occurs is for the purpose of procreation. Yeah. And it's spoken of in those terms, and it's often an obscene thing. Mm-hmm. It's often not. It's often like a hybridization between a great one and a human being, or the child of a great one and a human being, creating some hideous spawn. And it is off. There is no actual appreciation for the actual act or any emotion involved. It's a clinical look. It's a sort of like a functional look at things. Which
is quite ironic considering how much Lovecraft has now been attached, to tentacle porn, that sort of thing. You know what I mean? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's an entire subdivision now of Lovecraft-inspired pornography, which I'm sure he would be horrified about. Yes. I'm sure he would be absolutely horrified to learn. That alongside the fact of there being Cthulhu plushes now, I'm sure he would hate that.
This is actually an interesting question, right? I know that with... My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. This is just how the Fluffenhammer works. If this is the first time,
it works.
We bounce, we jump around. It is just how we talk.
Particularly when it's us three together.
Yeah.
We're providing context.
Yeah,
that's what we're doing.
Pretty much in the most scattershot manner, but
and also you're getting bang for your buck, ladies and gentlemen.
We'll get back to Warhammer at some point. Don't we?
Oh yeah. This is all important. This will all tie in. This is all salient. Yeah.
Yes.
Here's a question.
I promise.
How would H.P. Lovecraft feel about RPGs based on his work?
You know what? I don't know. I think he would be better inclined towards the RPGs than anything, because they are literary.
Yes, they are.
In nature.
He hated games, though.
He did. I think he'd be alright with it if it's RPGs done over Skype, because then there's no human contact.
Yes, then he'd be all right. He'd be okay then. I mean, he was a peculiarly funless human being, wasn't he? Yeah. He was consumed by his anxieties, and he seemed to not only be consumed by them, but obsess over them. Yeah. They were the core part of his life, to the point whereby they expanded out from being like the comparatively picayune racism and misogyny and homophobia that he exhibited, to being this cosmic nihilism. So he was afraid of humanity's pointlessness in the universe. He was afraid of humanity's groping out through science into areas that it potentially shouldn't. Where it might discover something or meet something that was entirely hostile to it, or was corrosive to it.
Yeah.
He was afraid of reality. He was afraid of the innate nihilism of reality, which is, of course, the notion that humanity is this speck, is this ridiculous offshoot or accident of evolution that has existed for less than half a second of time on a cosmic scale and probably won't exist for that much longer.
Yeah.
That's what he really perceived in the world, in culture, in society, in humanity as a whole, this decay, this sense that it's not going to be very long.
Yeah, it's at the end of humanity, there will things that will blink and go, what was that?
Exactly. It's like, did I even notice that? It's the equivalent, the cosmic equivalent of all of reality, of the universe just, fingering some grit from its eye.
Yeah.
It's literally that. That is the very core of Lovecraft's metaphysics and of the nihilism that informs it. It is this notion that humanity is isolated on this planet and is meaningless.
Mm-hmm.
There is no grander poetry. There is no... If there is something like an afterlife or a continuation, it's hideous. Or it doesn't care about you.
So that leads into the next question, and I'll throw this at Paul first, actually.
All right, okay.
As you are the guest.
Cool.
So, Paul, when I say to you Lovecraftian horror...
Yes.
How do you respond? How do you think about... What's the thought process that you go through to respond to that?
I think it's horror where, and we've touched on it a little bit here, where humanity is insignificant. Yeah. Where whatever happens, you're fucked.
I think that's it, isn't it? Because the other thing to note about Lovecraft stories is they are almost universally unhappy in their ending. There's usually this lingering implication of a grander horror.
Yeah.
Beyond the individuals who are exposed to whatever's going on, whether it's fish people or whether it's like elder gods or ancient secrets or whatever, they usually go mad. Or they die, or they go mad and die, or they die and go mad. It depends on like what's going on, But there is always this lingering implication that it's way beyond those individuals. The horror is not for them; it's for you. It's for the people around them, the ignoramus who don't know.
Yes, and it's also with Lovecraft. It's sort of a weird thing when it comes to Lovecraft horror. Death is not a release.
Often it's not.
No, death is. Usually things when you have regular horror. Oh, you get killed. There's a murder here. You get stabbed. That's it. No. There's worse things than death. That's the thing.
I mean, if you read the Call of Cthulhu, one of the implications of Cthulhu's mythos is when he awakes, all of humanity is going to go mad at the point of his awakening, and we're going to be lost to some eternal nightmare of insanity that will never end.
Sort of explains Trump.
What, do you think we're in it now?
Yeah, pretty much.
Great Cthulhu has risen and we're in it now. That's that's a very nice basis for a postmodern Lovecraft story. I may write that.
Brexit and Trump, there we go.
That's a really cool sort of political postmodern Lovecraft story. That's really cool. I like that a lot.
You can have it for free.
I really like that.
All right, then. So, next question. Mm-hmm. If you were to say to somebody who's never read Lovecraft, never heard of Lovecraft, as strange as that may sound, but let's face it, we are in this very odd literary bubble that we live ourselves in. And so there are a lot of people out there who don't know a lot about Lovecraft, especially about the person himself.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? No, they wouldn't know about Lovecraft himself, and they may not know about his work, but they will know about the themes
they know
and the imagery.
Who Cthulhu is,
Because it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's like if you've ever seen a horror film, if you've ever watched any science fiction, it's there. It's in comics, it's in video games. Bloody hell, is it in video games? It's everywhere, You cannot... It's like... how all human beings that are alive today are related in some way to Charlemagne?
Yes.
basically. It's exactly the same thing with Lovecraft's fiction. Every bit of fiction or media created today is in some way, certainly within particular genres, related to Lovecraft or feels its resonance and its influence.
It's an interesting point there, actually, because I mentioned how John Carpenter is heavily influenced by Lovecraft. Stephen King has said multiple times that with there was no Lovecraft, he would never have got started.
Oh, I mean, King is really eloquent about it. I think he called him the 20th century's dark and baroque prince.
Oh, I like that. Yeah,
isn't it
That's
lovely?
nice.
Yeah.
Which is I'd consider other than Pennywise and that whole sort of thing. There, I don't see huge amounts of Lovecraftian themes
if you
or
read
ideas.
The Mist is
No,
totally Lovecraftian.
that's true. But it's very rare. I thought he's more of a Poe overlap. Always felt.
I think he's Lovecraft when you remove the giant otherness and make it more. I don't want to use the term pedestrian because that sounds like
it's more domestic.
No.
Isn't it? It's more
Yes,
like
that's
colloquial,
true.
you know. It's like localized Lovecraft, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes a lot. That I can see that definitely. Yeah.
If that makes any sense, it's localized Lovecraft because you've always got that element of people going mad in King.
Yes.
That's almost in almost every single one, slowly driving themselves insane and being impacted upon by outside forces. Often in that, like in The Shining, you know.
Oh yeah.
That's kind of Lovecraftian. There are other stories that directly reference Lovecraft, like the Dark Tower series actively incorporates stuff from Lovecraft's mythology, as it does from The Lord of the Rings and from Sergio Leone and just hundreds of influences, just ridiculous numbers of influences. There's
a mushroom on it.
It's, just everything. It's just like that's King's grab bag, essentially.
Okay.
So the question I was going to ask here was, you meet this person and they say, I'm interested. Where do I start? What's the story that you suggest?
God.
Can you give me an idea of what that story is? And George, you first.
Okay, I would go. I mean, for my money, I would have to go. The thing with Lovecraft is he can be very alienating.
Yes, he can.
When you first come to him, I didn't like him when I first came to him. I'd read about him a lot through other writers, and I knew about his influence, but I didn't really know much about his work. So I think I was like in my early 20s when I first came to Lovecraft, and I didn't like it when I first read it. I was like, "What the hell is this? I can't read it. It's illegible." But it's an acquired taste. It's like wine or like olives. You need to kind of persevere with Lovecraft, and then you get to that point where actually nothing else will do. You get like a taste for it. So I would go for one of the more legible ones, which is either At the Mountains of Madness, which is one of the more legible ones, or something like Herbert West Reanimator, which is it's a more simplified story from many of Lovecraft's works. And it's more pared down, so you don't get like this efflorescence into like really abstract, abstruse cosmic horror that can be a bit difficult to deal with. So I'd go for them first as an intro.
Okay. Paul, your answer, please.
I'd agree with the Reanimator. I'd also go short and sweet, From Beyond.
Yeah.
That's simple, short story. It deals with the basics of a universe that is not perceived but inherently could destroy you. It deals with madness. It
probably also wants to.
Yes. Deals with the madness, but also how just how us tinkering with things is what wakes things up.
That's always the case, isn't it? That is often the case. I mean, the thing about Lovecraft's lore is that whatever horror is there is going to hit humanity at some point. Even if it's not tinkering, it's going to hit humanity at some point. But there is this overarching theme of humanity going where it's not supposed to go, and touching things it's not supposed to touch, and learning things it's not supposed to learn, and not just dying as a result, but like going mad and being physically corrupted by it.
I think then the only logical point to go from here is, first of all, my answer, which is Mountains of Madness, because it starts off as a Thing-style Arctic adventure and then goes way out there and involves albino penguins and the most terrifying sentence in the world, which is "tickly, tickly."
Yeah.
And then
Shoggoths.
and the city with the all the weird angles.
Yeah, the cubes, the cubes that exist in different dimensions, and
Or failing that, Dreams in the Witch House. Because
yes.
because that is a really simple story that is horrific, but it's almost like the starter for Lovecraft work, where you get a lot of the ideas and themes, but on a very small scale.
It just touches on them, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't go like, and it's nicely contained.
It is.
It's not like some of one of the big problems that people have with Lovecraft is he doesn't write characters. There aren't really any characters in Lovecraft.
No,
they're just sort of like vessels for the story. You know, they're sort of ciphers for the story. Dreams in the Witch House comes closest to having characters, I would say. To having a protagonist who has some complexity to him and some sort of like someone the reader can identify with.
Yeah, and
but
you've got the Christian analogy as well in that, because it's the only one I think they deal with the devil, as in like it explicitly says, "Oh, there's a devil analogy here."
Yeah, absolutely. So there's something familiar for audiences to latch onto. And then you get this just a little like a door crack of the weirdness.
Yeah.
You know, a glimpse of the weirdness. And that's enough. That's enough. That is a very good... In fact, that's probably the ideal opening story for someone who's never read this guy, who's never come across it before, or thinks they've never come across it, because they have come across it.
many, many times.
Yeah.
So let's get down to the correlations then. Let's get down to the one-to-ones. So, how does Lovecraft and Lovecraft's work affect and infect, actually, the Warhammer and Warhammer 40k universes? There's something you said before, George, and I think it's the perfect way to get started on this. Lovecraft's work deals with how humanity is I can't speak. You can tell you can tell it's been a long week with no sleep. We're a race that exists, but we're not important.
Insignificant. That's the word you were going for. Insignificant.
Inconsequential is the one I was actually trying to go for.
Yes.
But, oh, Christ. The fact that I've managed to get this far, I'm actually quite impressed with. For those of you who don't know, I have a new puppy. She is 8 weeks old, and I haven't slept for a week. So, moving on.
The dynamic of Lovecraft's metaphysics is overt, isn't it, in the 40k universe
Pretty
in particular?
much, yeah. Well, it's the warp, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the 40k and the AOS universes, you have this separation between physical reality and metaphysical reality, yeah? And then you have the overlap where they bleed together. That is so Lovecraftian, because that's what happens in Lovecraft. You have these entities that operate on levels that are at once abstract and physical. So you have the mythical and the scientific bleeding over into one another, becoming one principle in certain respects. So if you look at the warp, which is the 40k's equivalent of metaphysics, it is abstraction made manifest. It is a universe of metaphor, of stories, of thoughts, of dreams, of nightmares, and where they coalesce and form into creatures and to entities and sentiences and gods and demons and angels and devils. It's so Lovecraftian. It's like they couldn't have been more Lovecraftian if they tried, which they obviously did. But it's also in the way they describe this stuff. Like if you go back to the old ROC books, the language they adopt, the imagery they adopt, they clearly knew their Lovecraft. They clearly knew it. Even like the occultism that they apply to the warp. You know how like mortal sorcerers and cultists summon creatures from beyond the ether. It's exactly how it works in Lovecraft's lore. So you have these despairing mortal entities. You have these guys who are probably suffering under the yoke of the Imperium or are ground down, who find some scrap of forbidden lore, which slowly, it's a sentient thing, knowledge being a sentient thing, sort of like worming its way into their minds and slowly twisting their perceptions and altering their states of mind to the point whereby they become fodder. They become a gateway for demons to enter reality. That's very Lovecraftian.
Oh, pretty much, yeah. And also, I'm more of a 40k man. That's just I swing. But to be honest, also the way that humanity is seen by the Imperium is very Lovecraftian.
It is. It is.
it's just you're insignificant. You are a cog in the machine, or not even that. You're a resource. You're just a thing.
This is a really interesting point. The dynamic of humanity in the universe of 40K is very Lovecraftian in the sense that humanity has expanded out into the wider universe. It has found these alien, extra-dimensional entities that are entirely hostile to it. It has found that it has no wider place or purpose. It has even found that the metaphysics of the universe is hostile towards it and is intent on consuming it. But at the same time, you have this other Lovecraftian element, which is not Lovecraftian in terms of the mythology, but Lovecraftian in terms of the way the man himself thought, in that humanity has this hideous sort of genetic and supremacist quality about it, you know? The notion that humanity has to endure, that humanity has to be kept pure, that humanity is the rightful ruler of the universe, and that all other races and species have to be exterminated. They're innately inferior, and they only exist to be exterminated. That exists throughout 40K. So you have this other element of Lovecraftianism in 40K in particular, and it's not just humanity. The Eldari have it too. And so do the Necrons. This highly xenophobic quality and this sort of genocidal genetic supremacist quality, which is very Lovecraftian. It's very Lovecraftian, just in another way.
Yeah, it's odd because I say the team I play, Tau, is the only one that doesn't. They're like, come on. Everybody in the same pot.
The Tau are like the tonic to Lovecraftianism in 40K.
Indeed, yes.
They are the tonic to Lovecraftianism. But in every other respect, from its metaphysics to its politics, to its ideologies, to its cultures, to its species, everything is Lovecraftian. Indeed. In many and varied ways and shades. I mean, the thing I really like in both AOS and the 40K universe, and it's lifted directly from Lovecraft stories, is the way that knowledge is not only a forbidden thing. There are not only things that we should not know, it's a sentient thing. Knowledge has its own agenda. It has its own corrupting influence. So you can learn something about the warp, for example. A normal guy in the Imperium on some hideous forge world who's been laboring in the darkness for his entire life could discover some awful secret. And it's not just the knowledge of the secret itself that starts to alter his state of mind. It is the knowledge itself. It is somehow sentient. The warp starts to talk back to you. It starts to bleed back into your mind and alter you in initially very subtle ways, and eventually could end up physically transforming you. That's totally Lovecraftian, that notion. The forbidden law. Yeah, the forbidden law that is itself sentient and alters the way you operate. I love that. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. But there's, I think that, not to say a parallel, it's one of the main things is you've mentioned intent. And I think that's possibly where the nature of the 40K does diverge, or AOS, is you need to have baddies, or you need to have factions. Yeah. And I think that's where it took the Lovecraftian idea and went, let's make some baddies and goodies and intent, where there was never really intent.
Oh, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Although, they do introduce a degree of ambiguity into that, especially, with regards to the Chaos Powers, for example. Mm-hmm. Now, the Chaos Powers, yeah, they definitely have intent. They definitely have intent. I mean, they have to by the nature of their beings. But they are also natural products. This is an interesting way in which the metaphysics of 40K and of AOS removes itself from Lovecraft, in the sense that the Chaos Powers, which are the most significant and aesthetically Lovecraftian powers in the entire mythos, in the entire mythology, are actually somewhat removed from Lovecraft, in the sense that the old ones, the great ones, the entities of Lovecraft exist regardless of humanity. They are ancient beyond the ken of humanity, whereas the powers in the 40K universe and the AOS universe are actually reliant upon humanity and the sentient races to maintain shape and aspect and to feed them. So there is actually this removal from Lovecraft where the metaphysics tries to make itself its own thing. And quite successfully, I feel.
I think that is the biggest break between Lovecraft's work and the 40k universe. But if you go right the way back, and I do mean right the way back to the conception of Rogue Trader and Warhammer Fantasy Battle, there was a certain element of humanity encroaching on the domain of the gods. More so in 40k than there was in Rogue Trader, than there was in Fantasy Battle, because Fantasy Battle had the elves and the Slan blew a big hole in the universe. And God
Idiots.
damn it, Teclis.
It's all Teclis' fault.
Everything is Teclis' fault.
Everything. But even before he was born.
Yep.
Before his race was created, it was his fault.
He did it. He travelled back in time, quantum leap style, making wrong what once was right.
Yeah.
So in Fantasy Battle, you had this whole period, and that's what allowed the Chaos Gods to take notice of this world and start pouring themselves through to try and to come through and take what they could. In 40k, it was more the humanity went out into the stars, and that they found that they were small, insignificant, and were about to be devoured by these great cosmic creatures and beings that surpassed any knowledge that they had. Whilst nowadays, it is more the metaphysics are that the humanity's hopes and dreams are the perfect nectar for the Chaos Gods.
Absolutely,
more so than any other race. While Slaanesh loves her Eldari, it pales in comparison to the short, burning, bright lives that is humanity.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that is the most significant removal, I would say, from Lovecraft's metaphysics in the 40k universe. The fact that humanity is, in a way, necessary to these powers. I mean, that is very unusual. And it's a distinct contrast. And I like the way it makes the 40k universe and the AOS realms a little bit more distinct. But you also have this thing, like, what do you think of Lovecraft? I mean, you asked earlier, what do we think of what is Lovecraftian horror? I think it operates on a number of levels. Like, you've got, when people say Lovecraftian, they often mean aesthetically Lovecraftian. So, aesthetically Lovecraftian, tentacles. It's this notion of monstrosity that's so elaborate and so beyond what we understand of anatomy that it's almost impossible to imagine. And you have that throughout 40k and throughout AOS, of course. You've got, like, the Tyranids. The Tyranids are sort of biological Lovecraftianism in absolute overload, because they are this mass of tentacles and flesh and impossible anatomy. Demons, obviously, very Lovecraftian. Things like Mutilath, Vortex Beasts, massively Lovecraftian to look at. Chaos Spawn are probably the most Lovecraftian entity in 40k. You have that, but you also have ideological Lovecraftianism. You have metaphysics. You have the what we were talking about earlier, which is humanity's insignificance in the universe. You have the overlap between the physical and the metaphysical. You have entities that are too vast and operate on levels that are beyond comprehension, that can drive you mad by actually engaging with them. You also have things like that innate mystery in the 40k universe that is very Lovecraftian. You have things like the Catan. The Catan, which are star gods. They're called star gods, but exactly what they are is left up to interpretation. You know, they are ostensibly metaphysical entities that are not reliant on the warp. So they're actually separate from the core metaphysics of the universe, and it's never explained where they come from or what they're doing.
And it's odd that they also got involved in a war in heaven, which again is a very Cthulhian idea of these deities.
So isn't it? I mean, the war in heaven and the notion of the old ones, certainly in the 40k universe, is directly analogous to the deep time cosmic history that Lovecraft draws, because there is exactly that drawn in at the Mountains of Madness.
Yes.
You have the Elder Things, which are the equivalents of 40k's old ones, which are the creatures that are older than humanity, vastly, vastly older, evolved to states that humanity couldn't even dream of, that ostensibly seeded not only the Earth, but multiple worlds in reality with the chemical compounds for life, and guided evolution to the creation of humanity and to various other species. But to whom humanity is just cattle. You know, they're either a mistake or they're just cattle.
Yeah, and then then they lead to the Necrons, so...
Exactly. I mean, exactly. You have this, and the Necrons have a very heavy Lovecraftian element, particularly how they were initially introduced. Initially, you didn't have any of the stuff about the Catan. You didn't have any notion of them being biological beings. That never occurred in the early Necron stuff. But what you did have is explorators from the Imperium and from the Adeptus Mechanicum going out into these unexplored worlds, delving into ancient tombs and alien megaliths, and arousing something ancient and evil, which is it's a totally Lovecraftian trope.
Yes. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely Lovecraftian, and that has evolved over time. If you read the current Necron Codex, by the way, which I was reading this morning, I've just got it, and I love it. It's absolutely superb. It details the history of the Necrontire as they were, the Necrons as they were, and their entire history, particularly the War in Heaven, is of a scope that is equivalent to the histories that Lovecraft draws between his various races and species. And you have this wonderful sense with the Necrons of the universe winding down, of the great times, the glory days. You have it with the Eldari as well, of the glory days of the species of the universe long since past.
Yeah.
Long since past. Any hope or wider ideological intent they might have had is gone.
It's
done. And what's left is this state of scrabbling for survival. And just trying to claw some sense of stability from a universe that's intent on denying it.
Yeah, true. It's not to bring another fiction into this, but I always
go ahead.
I always see now the Necrons and the Citans, and particularly when it was a Necrons with the old ones and that great old ones.
Yes, yeah.
Vorlons and Shadows. The way that war came into our world, and like you say, the squabbling over an idea which got perverted, an idea, and then it ended up being something that just brought the universe close to collapse. And the scale, I don't know. I've just been reading the latest ones, and it just resonated with Babylon 5 a little bit with me. That was all.
Well, it's just this notion of extremity, isn't it?
Yes.
This is again something you get certainly from Lovecraft, and certainly in the universes of Games Workshop, but also in wider fiction as well, in sci-fi, in fantasy, in horror. The notion of the universe winding down, and it's not just in fiction. This is actually something that is true in physics, in cosmic physics as well. The heat death of the universe, the notion that reality is not a permanent thing, and that it will wind down eventually when enough cosmic time has passed. This is what Lovecraft is referencing, and it's what things like the 40K universe reflect. There is this innate nihilism amongst the coolness, amongst like the aesthetic fun of it, and the narrative and mythological fun of those universes.
In decay.
There is this sense of despair, this overarching sense of despair, which of course in those universes is even made manifest in Nurgle.
True.
Nurgle is the manifestation of this very concept, of this very aspect. He is despair and decay, and the sort of surrendering to the inevitability of it all.
Which many of the Chaos Gods have that element of surrender to a not perversion is the word, but to an extreme.
Absolutely. Yeah. The only one who doesn't emphasize surrender is Tzeentch. Tzeentch's servants often they don't even know that they're Tzeentch's servants, or they don't think they are. They're characters like Ahriman, who is diametrically opposed to Tzeentch. He actually doesn't worship Tzeentch, despite being highest in his favor. He hates Tzeentch. He absolutely hates Tzeentch. He's trying to free his legion from the clutches of Tzeentch. But Tzeentch is the manifestation of hope and of rebellion and of trying to better one's state somehow. So that thrashing against the bonds, that denial of authority and of surrender is actually what feeds Tzeentch ultimately. So his favoured servants, his puppets, are ones that don't bow down.
Yeah.
They don't surrender. That's the whole dynamic. And it's also the ultimate irony, of course. But what I really love about Tzeentch in particular is he is becoming more Lovecraftian as his status evolves. If you read the new books about the Chaos Gods, like the Chaos Demons Codex, he has evolved from a singular entity to being this fractured, contradictory thing that has multiple different facets and personalities that are constantly at war with one another. He's fast becoming like the manifestation of contradiction and of ambiguity, which is way more Lovecraftian. It's way more Lovecraftian. It's very much like Azathoth. You know, it's very like Azathoth.
I'm going to have to pick up some new books.
Oh, they're well worth reading. But that's true of all the Chaos powers. It's actually true of all the gods in general, particularly in AOS. Where you have this status where mortals can trespass on the realms of the gods. In fact, where they can become gods themselves. You have this theatre of Lovecraftian metaphysics occurring, where entities that were once mortal are actually vying with entities that were born as gods.
Ooh.
It's really cool.
That's touching a little bit more onto what other authors dealt with in the Cthulhu mythos, isn't it?
Yes,
like Ramsey Campbell and that sort of thing.
Absolutely it is. Where you actually, I mean, if you look at the extended Lovecraft mythos, which, you know, loads of people have written in, absolutely hundreds of people have written stories and extended, and it's an entire subgenre in itself now, Lovecraftian fiction. You have this elaboration of the mythology, where you have more in the way of human beings interacting with it and influencing it.
Yes. Like I recently just read a whole short story collection which was focused on just Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, and Lovecraft. Yeah.
It was just the entire book, so it just highlights it. That's the interaction. Yeah. But
it's so weird, though, isn't it? Because I would never have thought that would work, but I actually grudgingly came and read some of those Sherlock and Lovecraft stories not too long ago. You know what? They actually work really well.
Yeah, some of them.
When they're written well, that gels so beautifully.
Yes, the guy who is forever focused on logic and finding things out deals with something that, if you find it out, has no logic and will destroy you by your finding it out.
It's actually a really cool dynamic. If you're a deft enough writer, you can create something really beautiful out of that.
Yeah. But if you can't, many of them was, oh, Sherlock, you found a mystery. Oh, it's a bit scary mystery. Oh, I know not to dig into it. Story.
That's it. Yeah, that's a little bit. In fact, it's a bit of a cop out.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a cop out. But yeah, I mean, it's and clearly, if you look at like the artwork, if you go and thumb through the Tyrannid Codex or the Demon Codex or the Chaos Space Marine Codex, you could see the influence of Lovecraft.
Oh, just a smidge. I think you mentioned it. I think you're quite right in regards to the Tyrannids being the. To be honest, now more I'm talking about it, they are the ultimate ideal, or not ideal, the antithesis, so to speak, of what he was scared of, Lovecraft. That sort of amalgamation, that creature, that are intermingling, the consumption of self into something.
Something that's totally alien.
Yes.
That's like, it's outside the realms of possibility and of comprehension. They come from we know nowhere what.
Yes.
Or what they want, and there's no reasoning with them. You know, there is no way you can reason with them or argue with them or stand against them. No. They are so alien in terms of their motivations. There's nothing you can do about it.
No, I see coming into this show, I was thinking more along the lines of the Chaos Gods being and the war. But the more we're talking, I think, the Tyrannids.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean,
the thing for Lovecraft, Tyrannids.
Well, here's the fun thing. The Tyrannids are so obviously influenced by Lovecraft. They are. I mean, originally, obviously, they were the Giga alien in the 40k universe. But if you go and read about Giga when he was designing the alien, one of his big influences is H.P. Lovecraft. So you have this wonderful sort of familial relationship or evolution occurring, where you've got stories and mythology bleeding into art, which then inform stories, which inform miniatures, which inform mythology, and elaborate from there into something even more Lovecraftian. Because the Tyrannids have evolved from the point where they were just the gene stealers, and therefore just the alien in 40k, to being this carnival of Lovecraftian flesh, where it is all just a mass of tentacles and an unknowable anatomy.
Yes.
Well, it's the old sentence, isn't it? It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with.
Exactly.
It doesn't know pain or fear.
Mm-hmm.
It will never stop. And that's very much what the Tyranids are. They are the evolution gone mad. In fact, if we go back to something you were saying earlier about Azathoth, the bubbling mad creation, that is the Tyranids in a nutshell. That is the evolutionary process speeded up to absolute maddening heights.
To lunacy.
Yeah.
To absolute lunacy.
Imagine if they called a high feet Azathoth, then you think, oh, this is going to be bad.
I'm sure somewhere there must be, because they name the Hive Fleets after like old serpentine gods and demons and things. There must be someone somewhere who has called their Hive Fleet like Hive Fleet Cthulhu or Hive Fleet Azathoth or something like that.
I know I've seen a Hive Fleet Dagon. I know I've seen that.
Oh, well, Dagon's perfect, isn't he?
Yeah.
Dagon is perfect because he is one of the Lovecraft deities that is the most easily imagined and the most. I suppose he's the most easily depicted because he is just a big fish.
Yes, yeah.
You know, it's not like Azathoth, which is impossible to imagine and impossible to describe. He is just a big fish. And of course, there is a very overt and new influence there. When you look at the Ideneth Deepkin, there is a very obvious and overt influence.
Yeah, it's not as one-to-one as you think they were going to go for.
No.
They've gone for more the themes and the feel of a Lovecraftian Deepkin than Deep One, than the being actual fishmen.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did think when they were first announced, I thought, oh, those are going to be they're going to be Innsmouth bothering creatures, aren't they?
Yeah. But they're not. They're
not.
Very much their own thing.
They're very much their own.
The realms of Age of Sigmar, that the Lovecraftian influence is always pertinent to what the realms are, without ever coming out and saying, and this is a thing with face tentacles.
Yeah,
absolutely. The sort of the weird unknowable stuff that's happening within the realms. I've mentioned City of Secrets a couple of times now, where it's an entire city that's based on fortune and premonition, and it gets used as a form of currency in some cases.
Yeah, weirdness.
And there's a lot of the unknown Kadath that's in there for me.
Yeah, the real abstract stuff that you find in Lovecraft's weirder stories.
Yeah.
And towards the end of his life, they get friggin' weird.
Oh, they really do. The older he gets, the more shut away he gets, the more removed from humanity he gets. The stories get stranger and stranger.
They stray well beyond just the cosmic horror and nihilism, and they become these flights of almost like schizophrenic fantasy.
They do,
where it's reality melting at the edges, at the seams. It's just pure lunacy. The imagery it throws at you is so weird and so abstract that you almost feel like in your own head that you're slipping.
Oh god, yeah, and it's when was the cats?
Oh, that was towards the end of his life.
That's what I was going to say. That's one that always gets me. I was like, oh. Okay.
It is such a weird bloody book, that one. The Quest for Unknown Kadath, yeah? Yeah. It's the weirdest story you will ever read in your life, ladies and gents. I guarantee it will be one of the weirdest stories you ever read.
Never would you expect well, there's been lots of horrors with cats, but horror done with cats in this way.
It's like one of the things Lovecraft definitely had was a thing for cats. He really, really, really liked cats. And so cats turn up in his fiction all the time. And sometimes as protagonists, sometimes as main characters. It's so weird. It's so bizarre. But just like what Adam was talking about, these latter stories of Lovecraft, they go into the metaphysics, like the other realms, the other states of being that he created, and they're very like the AOS realms. They are these weird states that are not quite metaphysical, that are not quite abstracted, but they're also not quite physical either. They're very like how in the D&D universe you have this metaphysics where there are physical realms which are made from abstract notions.
Yes.
So you have cities like Sigil, for example, which is this weird polyglot place, which is the City of Doors. It's almost like It's like a crossroads where every state of being can be reached from it, whether it's physical or metaphysical, and it occupies this state of being, which is just one level of this insanely elaborate metaphysics, where you actually have Mount Olympus with the gods of ancient Greece knocking about on it, and you can go to it, you can walk it, you can climb it, you can go and meet Zeus and Dionysus and whatnot. You actually have the myriad hells that humanity has imagined in all of its various different religions and mythologies, and you can go to them. You can actually walk to them. You can go into these levels of hell, or these circles of hell, and go and see what's going on down there. You can
and get out pretty quick.
Pretty damn quick, you would hope, yeah. You can go to the underworld of the ancient Egyptian mythology and go and watch Anubis measuring the hearts of human beings, to measure their worth, whether they are worth being reborn into an afterlife, It's insane. It's so elaborate and so impossible to imagine, but it's the kind of thing that Lovecraft was going for in his metaphysics. And certainly what he expresses in his later stories.
Yeah, just that ultimate, everything is possible, everything is impossible.
Exactly that. And it's something that other writers like Ramsey Campbell, like Brian Lumley, just hundreds of others have taken up and have run with. They've just elaborated it beyond any comprehension. I mean, to go and try and catalogue or clearly define what is now called Lovecraftian mythology is almost impossible.
Oh god, yeah. It's become more of a feeling than a theme.
Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely more of a feeling than a theme, and this is why I say that the people who think they don't know Lovecraft really know Lovecraft. It's everywhere. They do, because it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. It's everywhere. It's in video games, it's in films, it's in cinema. It is, and it's certainly everywhere in 40k and AOS. It defines some of their core ideas and aesthetics. You can't have these universes without
I'd agree with that, yeah. I think that's probably a half-decent jumping-off point, in all honesty. Yeah.
I think so. I think we did rather well, though.
Although you people at home will never know about it. Massive issues happening behind the
behind the curtain there.
Where a small dog.
You had a canine conundrums.
It's lucky, really, that it's this subject, because I could waffle on forever about this. So,
and I could listen to you forever.
Well, in that case, then we'll just keep going for the next 18 hours.
God Almighty!
I have 3 children outside this door that need feeding.
we could. It's not outside the realms of possibility.
Oh God, Struth, yeah.
It's all right. They'll eventually eat each other. The strong shall survive. The weak shall be consumed.
Nice.
So, I think with all that being said, then, first of all, thank you very much for joining us tonight, Paul.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure, man. Been a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure for Paul.
It's always a pleasure, particularly when I use those particular rubs and creams.
Paul, he's ribbed for your pleasure. And of course, thank you very much, George.
My pleasure, man. Always. I mean, if there is ever one I was going to do, it was going to be this.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And then I think the next Patreon exclusive one will be. Actually, no, we've got ideas, but we haven't discussed what the next one's going to be.
Yeah, but I'd love to be involved. I love doing the Patreon exclusive stuff because it gives our people out there. It gives them something back, for dining to listen to us. I always enormously grateful for anyone who lends us their time.
Yes. As I had a conversation on the YouTube channel earlier this week, the feedback that we've been getting from YouTube has been superb.
It's surprisingly good, isn't it? I tend to on my own videos over on the Exaggerated Elegy channel, I tend to try and avoid the comments. I generally do, but you know what? The feedback for the Fluffenhammer has been wonderful.
It has, and thank you.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for not turning it into, what the internet can be.
Yeah. Thanks for not being usual YouTubers. Thanks for being awesome YouTubers.
Yeah. I love the discussions. Like, the elaborate discussions that are occurring without descending into argument about whether there can be female Space Marines or whether Space Marines have genitals or whether the Sigmar was a Primarch or whatever.
It's weird.
Yeah,
I love it.
It's odd, but it's brilliant.
Are you saying that fandom is growing up?
Let's hope so, eh?
Maybe we're just getting the old people who don't have the energy.
Yeah, don't have the energy anymore. They're burnt out with the arguments, you know?
Oh.
They've just surrendered.
We've got plastic sisters, so all our dreams are fulfilled.
That's a fair point, actually. It's a fair point.
But yet, still no Zotes.
Not yet.
He says, smelling something from Forge World, which is starting to smell a little bit four-legged and reptilian.
Yeah.
There's a smell coming from Forge World which tickles me.
Tickly.
Tickly. I'm just excited that the fact that a cyborg Amble is getting released.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Not going to lie to you, didn't see that coming.
Didn't, no. I mean, how often are we going to say that? How often are we going to say that on these podcasts? Did not see it coming. A million times. No. A million times.
So, with all that being said, let's get out of here. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much, George.
Pleasure,
and thank you very much to you, awesome Fluffer patrons, who have given us your money, and we have given you, hopefully, an enjoyable experience.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.